They arrive when joy is loudest, when drums thrum through the ground and lamps paint warm circles on doors, when a village believes the night belongs to it. Two children step out of the road's pale breath, small hands clasped, hair damp with fog, eyes the color of boiled rice water, skin that carries the bruised map of fevers long ago. In Chinese mythology, they are called Chimei, spirits that wear childhood like a mask, announcing themselves without words and tearing the threads that hold a season together. The first night after they appear, soup sours, the second night breath rasps. By the third, the streets empty and the rice bells go silent. The old storytellers insist they do not kill with claws or teeth, but with nearness. The way a stagnant pool does not shout, it pulls rot into everything that touches it. A scribe from the southern hills tells of a spring festival where flutes rose like birds, and the air smelled of sticky rice and sweet osmanthus. The two children stood at the edge of the lantern line and clapped in time, faces open and delighted. Before dawn, a fever crept through the sleeping households, fingers and toes turning dark at the tips, lungs crackling as if lined with dry reeds. People thought it was the river at first, then the food, then the wind. They remembered the children only later, and by then the carts for the sick were already circling. When the villagers sought a culprit, they found none, only a trail of ash-gray footprints where the dust had clung to damp soils. In another account from the far north, a salt caravan left the city gates before sunrise after a patrol spotted two little silhouettes near the watchtower. The leader believed he was beating fate by moving early. 3 days into the journey, the drivers coughed until their throats bled, and the mules lay down and would not stand. The caravan divided to save at least a portion of the cargo, and both halves reached two different towns, just as the same yellow mist curled along the wells. Either the children walked faster than a horse, or the world itself rearranged to place them on the road ahead. This uncertainty is part of their power. Your feet can run, but where will you run if your map also believes in them? In a river city that traded in copper and silk, a magistrate declared that fear was the true sickness and ordered a parade to prove prosperity. The Chimei came down the main street as if invited, a boy with a loose tooth and a girl with a ribbon that had once been red. They laughed at drums and stared lovingly at every dish carried on serving trays. That evening, the barracks reported the first 12 soldiers too weak to hold a spear. The magistrate sent for ritualists who burned hedgewood and cinnabar and pressed talismans to the gate. The children walked through smoke and past seals as easily as a breeze walks past a reed fence. Before the end of the week, the magistrate was dead, and the ritualists had cut their hair and left their tools outside the temple door. This is how the tailies mark the Chimei's logic. They are not impressed by status. They favor crowded places where certainty swells like ripe fruit. Then they reach up without reaching and knock it to the ground. In the white-walled monastery high in the pine belt, monks trained their breath to be smooth as water. They taught that nothing could cling to a mind that clung to nothing. When the Chimei arrived, the bell rope snapped on the second day, and the bell rang anyway each dawn, a cracked sound that struck the chest like a flat hand. Novices developed coughs that rattled against the cedar floorboards. The abbot lit incense, circled the courtyard, and recited the names of all benevolent beings he knew. The children sat politely on the steps and watched. A novice who had lost a little sister during a winter famine approached them with a bowl of steaming sweet porridge and a fox carved from a scrap of sandalwood. He set both down and backed away until his heels touched the bell-post. The girl picked up the fox and rubbed its belly as if heating it, then set it in the porridge, and the porridge curdled and turned the color of dirty snow. The abbot later said, the lesson was not that compassion fails, but that it does not negotiate with what was never alive in the way people are alive. Down on the coast, the Lee fishermen have a saying, if the children turn their faces toward the sea, stop your nets and go inland. One season the men ignored the saying because the moon was perfect and the market hungry. Their nets came up heavy with fish that looked whole and smelled like slaughter. Buyers gagged, and the city guard burned a day's catch in a pit. Even after the fire, gulls refused to circle the ash. The Li still leave little boats of reeds at the mouth of the estuary each new moon, with tiny clay balls inside that stand in for bellies so new that even sorrow has not learned their names. Whether the Chimei care is beside the point. The ritual reminds the living not to test the sea when the sea is already listening. The most persistent stories are not about villages, but about houses. A merchant on the Silk Road adopted an infant who had been left at the temple gate. Years later, when the boy had teeth and a loud laugh, two pale children appeared at the courtyard threshold and watched him play. They returned each afternoon for a week, always when the house was busiest, always smiling. On the 8th day, the boy could not stand without dizziness. On the 9th, he lay on his side and hummed to hide his breath's thin scrape. On the 10th, he died as the water clock croaked the third measure of the hour. The two pale visitors were seen that evening across the lane, sitting on the steps of the neighbors, hands folded in their laps like diligent students. The merchant lit 30 sticks of incense and swore off travel for a year, and broke his promise when the accounts tightened. He never escaped the sense that every cheerful child he passed could be a mouth for the same silence. The tailies say the Chimei love thresholds. They appear in doorways during betrothals, at the village gate during harvest, in the watershed where two brooks meet and locals leave red threads for luck. Everywhere people mark a passage, the children wait, because a passage acknowledges time, and time is where they eat. A story from the barley flank of the Western Plateau describes a wedding that doubled as the choosing of a new irrigation chief. Both roles were supposed to pull the village forward, to make something new. The children arrived at the outer ring of the celebration, clapping hands in delight as dancers traced circles with straw wreaths. The next morning the irrigation channel clogged with algae, the color of old coins cattle lay down and watched nothing, and the bride. Sister wet 2 handkerchiefs and held them to her mother's forehead until the mother's breath did not steam on the cloth anymore. When people talk about the Chimei, they argue about origins because origins promise leverage. Some insist the spirits are the sum of childhoods betrayed by famine and war, and that those who feed and protect the young will be spared, though the stories rarely support such bargains. Others claim the Chimei are the dream of pestilence itself, born where crops rot together and barn rafters sag with mildew, proof that nature has its own imagination. A stirrer of pigments in a city workshop proposed a colder idea. He said the Chimei are not spirits at all, but a habit, a way the world moves through communities when a certain pattern is repeated. It does not matter which idea you accept. The practical advice is the same. If you see 2 small figures watching fireworks without blinking, turn away from the light and watch the air. If it gleams yellow where it should be clear, leave. If your dog refuses a favorite path but howls at a corner where no one stands, turn your feet to a different track. If a neighbor mentions children who laugh at everything but never eat or ask for water, close your door and gather the old, the weak, the pregnant, and go. The go is vague on purpose, because any direction may be wrong. A woodcutter from the border hills once paced his decisions by his daughter's breath. He kept the baby wrapped in a quilt on his chest and waited for wind to lift the edge of the river fog. When wind did not come, he chose uphill, because uphill felt like work and work felt like life. He reached a cave with an opening that admitted exactly 1 man and 1 child. The first night, a fox he could not see cried down the slope. The second night, his daughter coughed. The third morning, he stepped out to gather kindling and saw 2 small figures at the tree line, patiently picking lichen from rock and pretending to feed it to each other. He stayed 1 more night, knowing it would be 1 night too many. Most attempts to confront the Chimei read like confessions. Officials swear they will not be cowed by old wives' tailies, then move their families inland under guard. Priests slap inked seals on lintels and wait to find the paper dry and cracked as if it had been there for winters. Exorcists promise to bind any spirit if they are given 3 nights and a bowl of rooster blood, but their nuts slip the moment the children smile. The only record that hints at pause is a fragment from a scholar who traveled with a troupe of puppeteers. He wrote that during a sudden outbreak, the troupe performed a morality play that ends with a child who refuses a gift she did not ask for. 2 pale children stood at the back and laughed along with the adults. When the curtains fell, the troupe discovered the town's fever had not spread that night. People begged for the play to be performed again. On the second performance, the children sat closer. On the third, they went on stage afterward and tugged at the puppet's strings. By dawn, the troupe leader could not lift his head, and the scholar could not hold ink steady enough to finish his thought. The lesson some draw is that the Chimei can be distracted by reflections of themselves in stories. But to set a reflection, you have to invite them to watch you, and nothing good comes from welcoming patient eyes. Ritual catalogs are full of small measures. Hang mirrors so the children must see their faces and remember what they lack. Tie bells at ankle height so the air warns you where they have walked. Draw a circle with salt around newborns and keep a basket of burnt mugwort under the bed. Feed stray dogs and trust their fear. Sleep with your head to the east and your feet to the west so your dreams are rectangles they cannot fold. Never whistle a lullaby after sunset. None of these measures proves itself in the tailies, but people keep them the way mariners keep taboos, not because the sea writes rules, but because the sea accepts wagers. The most detailed legend follows a scribe named Wei, who kept the records of a mountain pass. He took pride in writing what people did and scoffed at writing what spirits wanted. His valley held a harvest rite that year, and he noted weights of grain and lists of honored ancestors, while ignoring the thin rumor that 2 children had been seen skipping stones in the irrigation ditch. On the night of the rite, the children stood at the edge of the square like guests too shy to join a dance. Wei kept working in the stilt house he had built over the stream. When he rose to stretch, he saw the children under his floor, backs against the stream posts, legs drawn up, mist swirling from their mouths like breath on ice. He told himself they were only travelers' children, collecting warmth from the water. The next morning, the oldest farmer in the valley sat cross-legged in his field, hands in his lap, head bowed as if listening for the seed to speak. He did not rise. Wei recorded the death and sharpened his brush. By the 3rd day, a third of the valley coughed. By the 5th day, the 2 children were sitting on the bridge railing, kicking heels, watching the stream carry little fibers from the weaving shed. Wei wrote to the prefect demanding medicine and warning that panic would increase the tally of deaths more than rot. On the 7th day, Wei woke to the sound of his own name, spoken like a note tapped on porcelain. He went to his window and found the children looking up, pupils like smoked glass, faces calm as shells. He told them to go home. He told them a cold was moving through the pass and they should leave before they were trapped by snow. The girl tilted her head as if tasting rain that had not fallen. The boy smiled without lifting his cheeks. Wei closed the window and stared at the streak his hand had left on the paper pane. That afternoon, he climbed to the shrine above the pass, where people place simple offerings for travelers. He lifted the bronze mirror from its hook and carried it down. In the evening, he placed it on the bridge posts where the children sat at dusk. When the pair arrived and found themselves reflected, their faces changed only slightly, the girl squinting as if struggling to remember her own outline, the boy leaning closer until the glass fogged. They sat that way until the moon climbed into a slot between clouds. In the morning, fewer people coughed. Wei noted the number and did not sleep. On the second evening, he placed the mirror at the crossroad where the villagers had laid bundles of straw to honor the dead. The children squatted before it and breathed slowly, as if warming a cramped hand. In the morning, the cough returned as if it had never paused. Wei understood that he had not slowed them, but redirected their attention. He walked to the shrine, returned the mirror, and watched the pair from his doorway as they traced letters in dust with their toes. Letters from no alphabet he knew. On the 9th day, a young mother left a small pair of shoes at Wei's step and asked him to write down her son's name in the big ledger so he would never be mistaken for a thing. Wei took the brush and wrote until the page filled, then turned the brush over and used the wood end to press hard on the margin, as if gouging a furrow in the paper might divert a flood. He dreamed that night of walking behind the children on a path that ran between 2 fields, cut with 1,000 narrow ditches. Every ditch carried water, every water ran yellow, and the sound of all the channels together was younger than language and older than fear. Wei woke with a sentence in his head. He wrote that the Chimei need attention like fire needs air, and that the only way to breathe less was to refuse to watch. He ordered the village to turn their faces from the pair, to tie their babies to their backs and work the fields as if nothing stood in the lanes, to hold their funerals with eyes half closed. He made a rule that anyone pointing at the children would sleep outside the walls. For 3 days, the village pretended blindness. On the 4th day, the miller's wife saw the girl stroke the mill-house cat, and she smiled before she could stop herself. And by evening, her husband's cough stripped his voice. On the 5th day, the boy found a hoop in a shed and rolled it down the street, while the hoop's shadow stayed thick and unnatural, and children watched from inside doorways with fists in their mouths. On the 6th day, the fever turned cruel and took a child who had not looked at them once. Wei understood he had mistaken attention for cause when it was only measure. He walked to the bridge with a bowl of clear water and poured it out where the stream touched the posts that held his house. He spoke to no one. The children arrived and sat where they always sat and swayed slightly as if moved by a tune. Wei stepped off the bridge into the stream and did not stop walking until the cold taught him what his limits were. When the villagers pulled his body onto the stones, the pair watched with interest, as if seeing a new game. That evening the cough weakened. In the morning, the mist tasted less sour. A week later, the children were gone. The valley told the story for generations and disagreed about whether Wei's death had bought them a reprieve or simply completed a count that had always existed. This is how Chimei tales end, with an act that seems decisive and a silence that refuses to be read. Across provinces, people add their own warnings. Never place a cradle where a draft moves in a straight line, because pathways invite visitors. Do not bury broken toys with children, because an unfinished game can be played by anyone. If a stranger's child asks to hold your lantern, snuff it and hand them the cold stick, because it is better to insult a human than to light a road for something that never tires. If 2 children sit at the threshold and blink slowly in unison, the threshold is no longer yours. Some say the Chimei do not always wear 2 faces. Very old accounts mention a single child walking beside an irrigation ditch, tracing the water with one finger as if drawing a seam. Where one walks, crops yellow. Where 2 walk, households fail. Where 4 walk together, cities remember them in the names of empty neighborhoods. This scale is not policy. It is the bad poetry of statisticians who would rather count grief than admit they cannot aim it. The better guides are lived ones. A midwife says she can tell if the pair has passed by the way newborns pause before their first cry, as if listening for permission. A gravekeeper says he can tell by the way incense smoke pulls sideways, even when there is no breeze. A baker says he can tell by how quickly dough skins over before the oven, as if the air wanted to seal every mouth. These are the measurements the living take when a myth walks their street. The Chimei do not vanish in the way storms vanish. They finish and go hungry elsewhere. That is the hardest truth for those who crave closure. There is no list of names to chisel, no sealed gate to celebrate, no healed scar to point to, and say here the plague turned its back. Villagers look up from fields and pretend not to catalog the edges of their vision. Market towns tell jokes louder than usual and pretend they are not listening for a change in the laugh. Monks ring cracked bells at dawn and pretend they are not counting heartbeats. The youngest understand without instruction. Children are taught to be kind to other children and to run from those who never tire, to share food with the living and never leave it where eyes that do not blink can see it. The stories say the Chimei are not ancient in the way mountains are ancient. They are timely, meaning they arrive when time itself gives them room. Any season crowded with certainty can become a door. Any threshold with a lamp can become a stage. Any celebration sweet enough to fog the world's sense of balance can become a table where small hands rest and wait. And if you are thinking that your city is too bright, too clean, too mapped for such visitors to find, listen to how people cough on crowded trains in winter, how markets replace one worry with the next, how joy draws breath and spends it and asks for more. Under fluorescent light or paper lantern, under snow or monsoon, on a dirt road or polished square, the rule never changes. When two small figures stand where a road meets a gate, when they smile without asking for anything, when the air you breathe tastes faintly metallic, and the hair on your arms lifts as if remembering a draft, the most dangerous thing you can do is decide you understand what they are. The second most dangerous thing is to look away and pretend they are not there. The living survive in the narrow space between those two mistakes walking, past like neighbors late for work, carrying their elders, lifting their children, speaking softly to their dogs, hoping the world chooses not to count them today while it does its math with other towns. Because the Chimei are not a test you can pass. They are the presence that turns a year into a lesson and a lesson into a tally. And when the tally is complete, they leave as openly as they came, leaving behind the memory of small feet tapping a threshold and a village that does not clap in time to drums for a long while.